Have you ever wandered through a crowd and felt like you didn't exist? Like the city moved without you, bright alive and utterly indifferent? Tonight we tell the story of a woman who felt invisible, and the man who without meaning to saw her more clearly than anyone ever had. The chill of late October curled through the city of Elridge, like a quiet reminder that change was coming. As twilight painted the skyline in tones of silver and flame, Moore 25 walked briskly down a crowded avenue. Her coat tugged tight against the wind. Her blouse white slightly, rumpled hinted at a long day behind her chestnut hair, twisted into a loose knot. Round glasses, slipping down her nose. She kept her eyes low, her pace steady. To the world, Elara was just another passerby. But inside she carried a silence that ached louder with each step. Her job was nothing spectacular, administrative work at a boutique publishing firm, a place where creativity was discussed in meetings, but rarely touched her desk. She scheduled calls, filed contracts, drafted newsletters that went unnoticed. Her colleagues were kind but distant. No one asked about her favorite book or why she always stayed 5 minutes late. She lived in a tiny apartment above a flower shop in East Elridge, where the hum of life below lulled her to sleep. She didn't out-crave much, just quiet, just enough, but lately even that quiet felt hollow, like she was watching her own life from behind glass. Meanwhile, across the city, 31 floors above ground, in an office lit by ambition and midnight deadlines. Callum Reeve, 31, stared out at the skyline of the empire. He was so built, he was every inch the archetype black suit, polished shoes, sleeves rolled sharp. But his reflection in the window revealed tired eyes and a heart far older than his years. Callum was the CEO of Reeve Tech, a name whispered in every rising startup circle. He was precise, controlled, ruthless when needed. People respected him, some feared him, but no one really knew him, because behind the sharp smiles and confident strides, there lived a boy who still laughed at his own bad jokes, who once wore a flamingo tie to a funeral just to make his grieving friends smile. He told himself love was a fairy tale, one he'd outgrown, chemicals, hormones, sentimentality, he could break it all, down to science if he tried. But tonight science had no answer for the bitterness in his mouth, the weight in his chest. A merger had collapsed. Hours before, trust shattered. Prospects vanished. And without knowing it, both he and Elara were about to walk into the same ballroom at the same time for very different reasons. She didn't come here to mingle. Elara had only come because her boss insisted networking builds bridges, Lady said. But right now she didn't want bridges. She wanted silence, to disappear into the wallpaper and drown her thoughts in something colder than the night outside. Hunched in a velvet armchair, tucked into the corner of the grand ballroom, Elara nursed a trembling glass of white wine. Her little black dress clung gently to her slender frame, but among the sequins and champagne laughter, she felt like a ghost. Yid took a sip, then another. Maybe the wine could numb the sting she didn't dare name out loud. Across the room by the dimly lit bar, Callum Reeve unbuttoned his sleeves and dropped his tie onto the counter like it was a burden. His suit jacket hung on the back of the stool. Without hesitation, he ordered a whiskey, neat, downed it, ordered another. Not because of the failed merger that was just business. What gnawed at him was something far more human, the hollow ache that success could never fill. His gaze wandered. Elegant gowns, polished smiles, conversations that smelled of fake charm and stale ambition. He was about to leave when something, or rather, someone, caught his eye. Tucked into the corner like she belonged nowhere else was a young woman, eyes distant, shoulders drawn. Inward, clutching her wine glass like it held her together. She wasn't conventionally striking. No scarlet lips or golden hair, like the women who usually drifted his way. But there was something hauntingly real about her, Maybe it was the sadness in her eyes. Maybe it was the way she tried to make herself small. Whatever it was, he walked toward her without thinking. "This doesn't feel like a party," he said, sliding into the chair beside her. "Feels more like a trade show for egos." Elara startled, nearly spilling her wine. She turned, eyes wide behind her glasses, taking in the man with sharp cheekbones, tired eyes, and a half-smile that didn't quite reach his soul. She didn't answer immediately, just stared into her glass, then muttered, "Yeah, something like that." Callum tilted his head, reading her like a page already folded in half. "You didn't want to be here? Someone made you come." She let out the smallest laugh, the kind that only escapes when someone hits too close to the truth. "Was it that obvious?" She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as obvious as the exit sign. He smirked. "Let me guess. Your boss called this a golden opportunity, but right now, you'd rather be curled up with a book and a blanket." She blinked, surprised, nodded. Callum softened. Then, "Why do you look like your world just collapsed?" Elara tried to shake her head, but the wine loosened her lips. "I didn't get a promotion," she said, eyes on the rim of her glass. 6 months of hoping, and I wasn't even close." "No big deal," she added quickly, but the way her voice cracked betrayed her. Callum raised his whiskey. "I lost a deal that took me 2 years to build." He clinked her glass gently. "Seems like tonight we were both a little lost." They drank, not to forget, but to share something wordless. Pain, disappointment, exhaustion. What followed was tea flirtation. It was something quieter. They spoke of failures like old scars, of dreams that no one else understood, of the loneliness that followed them home like a shadow. The ballroom around them faded. The world shrank to that corner, 2 chairs and the invisible thread beginning to form between them. No one could say exactly when it shifted. Maybe when his fingers brushed hers. Maybe when she met his eyes and didn't look away. They didn't talk about tomorrow. They didn't ask for names beyond the basics. Just the here and now. One unexpected night of connection in a world too busy to notice either of them. She whispered into the darkness, barely audible. "Just one night, okay?" And his voice, rough but tender, replied, "Just one night." But neither of them knew that fate had already rewritten the ending. Neither of them knew that the night wasn't an ending. It was the quiet, trembling beginning of something far more complicated and far more real. Morning arrived slowly. Golden sunlight crept through the velvet curtains of a high-rise suite in downtown Elridge, dancing in across polished wooden floors and soft silk sheets. Elara stirred. Her mind was thick with fog. Remnants of last night, swine clinging like a dream. She couldn't shake off. She blinked at the unfamiliar ceiling, then sat up halfway. Heart starting to race. A king-sized bed. White linens. A faint trace of cologne on the pillow, and then the quiet sound of someone breathing beside her. She turned her head. Callum still asleep. His expression softer now. Lips slightly parted, one arm flung lazily over a pillow. Gone was the sharp, composed man from the ballroom. In this moment, he looked almost peaceful, like someone lost in a better world. Panic rose like a wave crashing against her chest. "What did I do?" Elara sat up, fully clutching her head, as scenes from the night before unraveled inside her like a reel of scattered film. The gala, the laughter that felt too loud, the wine that went down too fast, his voice, his eyes, the way the world seemed to hush when he reached for her hand. And then no hesitation, no logic, just a pull too strong to fight. She bit her lip, hard, willing the emotion back down. This wasn't her. She didn't do things like this. She glanced over again. Callum hadn't moved. His dark hair was tousled, his breathing steady, untouched by the storm stirring beside him. In the dim light, he seemed less intimidating, more human. But somehow, that only scared her more. because she didn't know who he was, not really. A name, a moment, a feeling, that was all, and she wasn't ready to want more than that. Without a sound, she slid out of bed. Her bare feet met the cold floor as she quietly searched for her clothes. Her black dress lay crumpled at the foot of the bed, her heels tucked awkwardly near the curtain. Her hands trembled as she zipped herself up. She moved like someone escaping not from danger, but from confusion, too heavy to carry. Every breath felt like a countdown. She expected him to stir to say her name, but he didn't, and strangely, that hurt a little. She paused at the desk, hand hovering over a small notepad, bearing the Hotel-S crest. For a moment she considered leaving without a word, but something inside her refused that kind of silence, so she picked up the cheap pen and wrote her handwriting, barely steady. Just one night. Thank you for making me feel seen. She folded the paper neatly and placed it beside the half-empty glass of whiskey he hadn't touched again. Then she left. The soft click of the door behind her sounded louder than it should have. Down the hallway, into the elevator. Out into the raw morning air, the wind of Elridge slapped her cheeks cold and sharp like regret. She closed her coat tighter and hailed a cab. As the city blurred past the window, lights, and glass and sky, she whispered to herself, it was just a mistake. Forget it. Elara, go back to being you. Back to the small apartment above the flower shop. Back to tea mugs, quiet nights, and unread books stacked by her bed. Back to the life where no one expected anything too deep or too daring. But the problem with trying to forget is that memory doesn't always ask permission. Because no matter how she tried, Elara couldn't erase the image of Callum Reeve, the way he smiled with sadness in his eyes, the warmth in his voice when he said, we were both a little lost. And for just one night, she hadn't felt so alone. In the hotel room, the silence remained unbroken. Callum stirred much later, the sunlight brighter now, his head ached with the dull echo of whiskey and wonder. He opened his eyes, expecting her to still be there, but the other side of the bed was cold and everything suddenly felt too quiet. The silence in the room was immediate, too still, too final. Callum sat up, his instincts tugging at him before his thoughts caught up. The space beside him was empty. The blanket folded inwards, still holding the shape of someone who had slipped away quietly. He looked around. No dress on the floor, no heels in the corner. No soft laughter or presence lingering in the air, just a note. A small piece of hotel stationery resting beside the glass of unfinished whiskey. He picked it up with fingers that suddenly felt unsure. The ink was uneven, the handwriting rushed. Just one night. Thank you for making me feel seen. He read it once, then again and again, until the words no longer made sense, but the emptiness beneath them did. He closed his eyes, whispering the line to himself. Just one night. But why did it feel like she had taken something with her? Callum leaned back onto the bed, the note still clutched in his hand like it could anchor him to something real. He laughed softly, bitterly. This is ridiculous, he muttered to the ceiling. He was Callum Reeve, CEO, decision-maker, architect of logic. He didn't do emotions, didn't believe in romance. And yet here he was aching for a woman whose last name he didn't even know. All he had was a first name, Elara, whispered like a confession in the haze of wine and moonlight. No phone number, no trace, just this scrap of paper and a strange ache in his chest he couldn't shake. He got up, walked to the window, and stared down at the early stirrings of Elridge. The cars, the blinking signs, the anonymous thousands flowing beneath him. She doesn't want to be found, he murmured, but his hands betrayed him, folding the note gently and slipping it into the inner pocket of his suit. His mind may have tried to let go, but his heart had already chosen otherwise. He needed to see her again, not to reclaim the night, but to ask the one question echoing in his soul. Why just one night? Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Elara did what she did best. She disappeared into her routine. She arrived at the office early. She smiled when expected. She answered emails with polite precision. She took on extra tasks, stayed late, even volunteered for things she used to avoid. Anything to silence the part of her that kept asking if he remembered, if he cared, if it had meant anything at all. Each evening she returned to her apartment, made tea, and curled up on the couch. And each time she stared out the window, the lights of Elridge felt more like stars slipping through her fingers. She told herself it was nothing, just a night, just weakness. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, his quiet confidence. The way he listened, the way she felt just for a moment, like she was enough. She hated that. "I can be weak," she whispered to her reflection one night. "He doesn't belong in my world." But hearts done to listen to logic, and neither did his. Callum tried to return to business, to the boardroom, to balance sheets and signed contracts. But his thoughts kept slipping away, back to a girl with chestnut hair and eyes full of silence. He kept the note in his desk drawer, reading it like it might one day say something new. He noticed strangers who looked a little like her, the way they tucked their hair, the way they hesitated before speaking, but none of them were her. He finally confessed it to his closest friend, Ethan, over beers one night. "You're losing it," Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "It was just a night, man. You've had those before?" Callum didn't smile. "This was different," he said quietly. "She was different." Ethan leaned back, skeptical. "You don't even know her?" Callum looked down at his drink, voice almost inaudible. "I didn't need to. I felt it." A pause. She was real. He had no idea that just a few weeks from now, fate would lead him back to her, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 months had passed since that night, but for Elara, time did nothing to quiet the memory. She tried, she truly did. Every morning she rose before dawn, rode the train through the foggy stillness of Elridge, slipped back into her desk job at the publishing office, entering data, replying to emails, pretending to be fine. She told herself it had been a lapse in judgment, a moment born from loneliness, wine, and the wrong lighting. But at night, when the city lights flickered through the window of her tiny apartment, his face returned, his crooked smile, those eyes that saw too much, the warmth in his voice that made her feel for the first time in years like she mattered. She hated how often she remembered. So she worked longer hours, took on more projects, signed up for online classes. She didn't need anything to fill the silence he left behind. Dawn. "To be foolish," she muttered to herself. Once staring at her reflection, "He's forgotten you by now." But what she didn't know was that he hadn't. Callum kept the note, still folded, still creased, still tucked into the top drawer of his desk like a secret he couldn't stop rereading. "Just one night. Thank you for making me feel seen." Those words lingered like perfume. He had tried to find her, asked the gala organizers, had his assistant scan guest lists, attendance logs, even social media, photos from that night. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished. He told himself to move on. Thus was on. But her name, her eyes kept circling back like a song he couldn't stop humming. And then one cold January morning, the unexpected happened. The 45th floor boardroom of Reeve Tech buzzed with the rustle of folders and coffee cups. Callum sat at the head of the long glass table, dressed immaculately in a tailored gray suit and dark navy tie. The meeting was with a smaller media firm, a collaboration project. Nothing groundbreaking, but after the last failed deal, he insisted on overseeing it himself. He skimmed the prep documents until a soft voice drew his attention. "Good morning, everyone. I am Elara Moore, representing Halden & Co." His head snapped up, and there she was, standing at the far end of the room, clutching a stack of papers, hair pulled back, round glasses framing those unmistakable eyes. the same quiet strength in her voice, only now polished by professionalism. She looked like she belonged there, and yet she looked exactly as she had the last time he saw her, in his arms, whispering just one night. Elara froze the second their eyes met. She'd prepared for this meeting meticulously, had practiced her pitch until her voice went hoarse. But nothing could V prepared her for him. There he was, tall, composed, the man she had spent 3 months trying to forget, now seated before her, like fate had rewritten the script. Her pulse raced. Her fingers tightened around the folder in her hand. Danton, lose your composure, she whispered to herself. This is just business. He's just a partner. But Callum couldn't hide his reaction. A slow, knowing smile tugged at the corner of his lips. His eyes gleamed, like he'd just stumbled across something he thought was lost forever. He leaned forward, voice lower, warmer than it should be been. Miss Moore, he said, with that familiar spark. Have we met before? You look strangely familiar, Miss Moore. We've met before Haven. To we, you look unmistakably familiar. The room froze, heads straight turned, brows lifted, a beat of silence thickened the air. Elara felt heat crawl up her neck, her pulse hammering, as every pair of eyes suddenly found her. What is he doing? She steadied herself, forcing her tone into something clipped and neutral. I am not sure, Mr. Reeve. Perhaps at some industry event, her voice betrayed her. It trembled just slightly, but enough for him to notice. She looked down at her documents, grasping for composure, like it was a lifeline. Callum didn't press, not directly, but his gaze stayed on her, calm and unwavering. He murmured, with a thoughtful tilt of the head. Usually remember faces, especially the memorable ones. Elara wanted the ground to open beneath her. She drew in a quiet breath, trying to drown out the noise in her own chest. This is work. That night meant nothing. He is just a business partner. Act like it. She launched into her presentation, her voice steady but her soul spiraling. Every sentence felt like walking a tightrope, while his presence pulled at her balance. And that smile of his, part amused, part unreadable, was making everything worse. She wrapped up sooner than planned, her fingers shaking slightly as she gathered her notes, done escape, breathe. But just as she turned to leave, his voice caught her mid-step. Miss Moore. He called after her, tone smooth and impossibly casual. I'd love to discuss the project further. Are you free for lunch today? She froze. Beside her, her colleague Owen widened his eyes and leaned in to whisper, That's the Callum Reeve. Asking you to lunch? Do you know what that means? She didn't respond. Couldn't he? Because Callum's eyes were still on her. Open, unreadable. Impossible to dodge. Sure, she replied, her voice soft. Vimetis? Fine. From that moment on, Callum became a presence she couldn't avoid. Meetings, hallways, shared documents, he was everywhere. Always close enough to notice. Always just a little too charming for comfort. He teased her, but never cruelly. He poked fun, but never crossed the line. In one meeting, he said, with mock formality, Ms. Moore, or should I say Miss One Night Elara, I mean Miss Moore. The team chuckled. Elara flushed, but said nothing. She couldn't afford to show how her walls were already cracking one afternoon. He accidentally dropped his pen at her feet. Mind getting that for me? He asked with a crooked grin. I'm having a clumsy day. She handed it back. Wordlessly, her jaw clenched so tight she nearly chipped a tooth. But Callum didn't stop. He sent emails wrapped in humor and hidden meaning. One project update was titled Q1. Forecast, 80% chance of success. 20% chance. Your smile distracts me from my slides, and a P.S. Wear the navy blouse next time. It suits you. Elara rolled her eyes so hard it hurt. Her reply was 2 lines long. Thank you. I'll review the attachments. She thought she was being cold, but the next morning, there was a vanilla latte on her desk. No note this time. just the scent and memory it carried. She stared at it for a long time, then took a sip, smiled just a little, muttered pest under her breath, and let her heart waver. Callum grew bolder. One day, during a team meeting, Elara presented a pitch for the marketing strategy. When she finished, he was the first to speak. I agree with Miss Moore, not just because the idea is solid, but because she delivered it with the most convincing smile I have seen all quarter. The room laughed. Elara wanted to disappear. She kept her voice even. Thank you, Mr. Reeve. Let's stay focused on the data. He smiled, but didn't push. And somehow that was worse. Each day became a battle between what she knew was right and what her heart kept whispering when she let her guard down. She reminded herself of that night, of how reckless it was, of how easy it had been to fall. She told herself she couldn't afford to fall again, not with someone like him, not when she wasn't sure if she was just another game. But Callum wasn't like the others, and her heart was starting to remember that too. It didn't feel like a game. Not to him. Callum remembered the way Elara sipped her vanilla lattes, the quiet joy it brought her. He remembered how she always bit her lip, when unsure how her fingers tapped the corner of her notebook during long meetings, and when the forecast called for rain, he discreetly placed an umbrella under her chair before she even noticed the clouds. It was never loud, never obvious, but it was always intentional. One long afternoon, after a project meeting had wrapped and the others filtered out, Callum lingered behind Elara. He said gently. She paused, her hand still resting on the conference table. You can keep pretending that night didn't happen, but I can tee. She froze, heart hammering. Eyes fixed on the notepad in front of her, like it could shield her. I know you've been trying to keep your distance, he said, voice low, but I am not letting this go. She took a step back instinctively, her voice firm. Mr. Reeve, please let us keep this professional. We are as colleagues. He smiled, but this time it wasn't cheeky. It was earnest, a little sad, a little dangerous. Professional, he echoed. Sure, but can I tell you something? She didn't respond. Every time you bite your lip like that, I want to pull you out of this room and kiss you until you stop doubting if you worth it. Her breath caught. She turned away, cheeks burning. Dawn, she whispered. Dawn, to say things like that. You think I don't? To understand, he asked, voice softening further as he stepped closer. Then help me. Let me understand. But Dante pushed me away, like that night was all it could ever be. She didn't answer, didn't trust her voice. So she left quietly, quickly, before her heart could betray her again. But the walls she'd built, they were already cracking. The next Monday, Elara walked into the office with a storm inside her chest. It had been 3 months since that night, and 2 weeks since he reappeared like a page from a book she thought she'd closed. She tried to remain distant, tried to treat him like any other professional connection, but Callum had other plans. His teasing, his glances, his carefully timed kindness, never overbearing, but never allowing her to forget he wasn't pulling away. He was drawing closer, and Elara. She didn't know whether to run or reach for him. Callum, meanwhile, felt something he hadn't in years, something reckless but steady. He didn't want a second chance at that night. He wanted forever. With her, but he saw how guarded she was, the way she flinched at affection, the hesitation in every glance. She was afraid. And that only made him want to protect her more. That morning, she had barely logged in when her colleague Marianne approached with a grin and a raised eyebrow. You've got a delivery, she sang, placing a bouquet on Elara's desk, simple white roses wrapped in brown craft paper, elegant, gentle. The note attached read, For the girl who blushes more beautifully than she knows. P.S. Smile today. Okay, Elara. Felt the warmth rush to her cheeks before she could stop it. She didn't need a name to know who it was from. Marianne winked. Looks like someone's smitten and not even trying to hide it. Elara shook her head, brushing her fingers against the petals. It's just teasing, she murmured, but even she didn't quite believe it. She tucked the flowers gently into the corner of her desk, tried to focus, tried to pretend, but Callum wasn't he done. At noon, a vanilla latte appeared beside her keyboard. No name, no note. Just the comforting scent and the memory it carried. She stared at it for a long time, then picked it up, took a sip, and whispered to herself, "Such a pest." But she smiled, and her heart traitorous as it was fluttered again. You'd think flowers and coffee were enough. But the next day, she arrived to find a book sitting neatly on her desk. How to Love a Shy Girl. A sweet cartoon cover, slightly ridiculous. Inside the front cover was a handwritten message. Read this. You might find it oddly familiar. P.S. Chapter 7 is my favorite. She opened to Chapter 7. A line was underlined in pencil. Be patient. Her heart is a quiet place. But once she lets you in, you'll never want to leave. Elara closed the book. Hiding her face behind it, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Inside the book, she'd found more than flirtation. There were highlighted lines, simple, heartfelt. Be patient, she is worth the wait. And another, one smile from her, could soften even the coldest heart. Elara's fingers paused on the underlined sentence. Her chest ached with something she couldn't name. Just then Owen strolled past her desk, caught a glimpse of the book, and burst out laughing. Elara, that is not a note. That S, a full-on declaration of love. Should we expect wedding invitations next? She flushed instantly and slid the book into her drawer. It's just a joke, she muttered, but her heart was racing. She told herself to stay grounded, to keep it professional, to not fall. But every small gesture from Callum chipped away at the walls she'd so carefully built. And he wasn't as winning her over with grand speeches or flashy gifts. He paid attention, noticed when her coffee cup was empty. Noticed when her smile didn't reach her eyes, really listened, when she spoke in meetings, even when others didn't. One blustery morning, Elara had rushed out of her apartment in such a hurry she'd forgotten her coat. In the meeting room at Reeve Tech, she sat silently shivering, trying not to show it. But Callum noticed. Without saying a word, he removed his charcoal gray jacket, stood, walked over, and gently placed it around her shoulders. Miss Moore, he said casually, let's not catch a cold over quarterly numbers. Her breath caught at the warmth of the fabric and the faint trace of his cologne. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Thank you, she murmured. He smiled, turning back to his seat as if nothing had happened. But the quiet murmurs around the table said everything, and he didn't. He'd stop there. One rainy evening, she worked late. When she finally stepped outside, she realized she'd forgotten her umbrella. She stood under the building's awning, watching the storm like it had betrayed her. Then a large umbrella hovered above her, and a voice teasing but tender filled the air. My girl, Callum said. Already, soaked through, planning to bathe in the rain. She spun around. There he was, completely drenched, shirt clinging to him, hair matted to his forehead, grinning like a fool. I don't want you getting sick, he added, stepping closer to shield her. Elara instinctively pushed him back, her face burning. Dawn, to do that. He tilted his head, mischief dancing in his eyes. Why not? He asked. We've been closer than this before, or have you forgotten? He winked. She turned sharply, her voice low and flustered. Dawn. Talk nonsense, but the smile tugging at her lip. Lips betrayed her. Without another word, he took her hand and pulled her fully under the umbrella. Come on, he said. I'm taking you home. No arguments. And just like that, she followed. They walked together through puddles and soft streetlight, his hand warm in hers. He rambled about spilling coffee on a client's laptop, about begging a hotel chef to make him a sandwich at midnight. She laughed, really laughed. And in that moment, she forgot to be afraid, despite her efforts. Elara couldn't deny it anymore. Callum wasn't he, just persistent or playful. He cared. He remembered the way she bit her lip when stressed. He noticed when she avoided eye contact in meetings. He made space for her ideas, like they were the most important ones in the room. It wasn't grand. It was quiet, real, intentional. And that terrified her, more than anything. Because Elara had believed in love once and been left with disappointment, she feared he was playing a game that men like Callum, successful, magnetic, untouchable, would always outgrow women like her, ordinary, careful guarded. She told herself to stay cautious, but every time she looked into his eyes, she saw sincerity that unraveled her defenses. The turning point came quietly, late at night, in a nearly empty boardroom. At Reeve Tech, the collaboration project had reached its most critical juncture. Deadlines pressed down like storm clouds, and the team stayed late, determined to get it right. It was almost 9 p.m. when Elara stood at the front of the glass conference room, her voice tired, but composed, presenting the final report. She finished, to polite nods, quiet murmurs of approval. Then one by one, the others filed out, leaving only her and Callum in the dimly lit room. She gathered her papers carefully, each fixed on the table. She could feel him still seated at the end, his presence as tangible as a heartbeat. When she turned to leave, he stepped into her path. "Elara," he said. There was no smile, no teasing lilt in his voice, only gravity. She looked up and found herself caught in his gaze, those steel gray eyes that always saw more than she wanted to show. "I know you are trying to forget that night," he said quietly, "but I don't want to." The words struck her like thunder. "I want more than just one night." Elara, her breath stilled. The room shrank. It was just the two of them, and the storm rising inside her. "Mr. Reeve," she whispered, her voice barely holding. "Please, this is work. We should keep things professional." Callum took a step closer. His voice softened, but held its edge of truth. "Professional," he echoed. "How can I pretend, when every time I look at you, all I want to say is that you are the best thing that's ever happened to me?" She turned away, blinking hard, trying to hold back the tears. "You don't understand," she said hoarsely. "You don't know who I really am." "I am not the woman you think I am." Callum reached out, his fingertips brushing her sleeve. "Then let me find out," he said. "I don't need perfection. Elara, I don't need you to dazzle anyone. I just need you. The woman who laughs at my terrible jokes, who makes me want to be better." She stepped back, clinging to her folder like it could protect her from everything she wanted. I need time," she whispered, then turned and rushed out the door. The cold night air slapped her as she fled to the lobby. She gasped like she hadn't breathed in hours, heart thundering in her chest. She was afraid this feeling would undo her, afraid that if she let him in, he'd walk away like the others had. But deep down she knew she was already falling, despite everything. Callum Reeve made her want to believe in love again. Callum stood alone in the conference room, the door swinging softly behind her. He exhaled slowly, eyes stinging. The man who always had the answers was now stuck in a question, with no clear way forward, and worse still, there was something looming, a family legacy, a duty. His name was Callum Reeve, CEO of Reeve Tech. He'd made his name from strength, clarity, and control, but lately his world had begun to blur, especially now as a quiet storm brewed behind closed doors. His father, Frederick Reeve, a titan of industry and ruthless strategist, had orchestrated something he could no longer ignore, an engagement to Serena Wexley, the elegant and impeccably poised heiress of a global finance empire. It wasn't about love, it was about alliance, status, legacy. It's time you settled down, his father had said, over whiskey, at their Upper West penthouse. Serena is sharp, she knows our world, she won to crumble. His mother, gentle but firm, had echoed it softly, holding his hand. She'll keep you grounded, Callum. You need someone who understands how this works. But how could he explain that his heart had already chosen someone else? Someone who wasn't the one born into power or a polish, someone who smiled like sunlight and made coffee. Breaks feel like poetry, and now whispers were leaking across offices, between departments. At lunch one day, Elara sat quietly, eating a sandwich at her desk when Marianne leaned over, holding up her phone. Elara, did you see this? On the screen, Reeve CEO, reportedly engaged to Serena Wexley, sources confirm merger. Between empires, the world blurred for a second. Elara's fingers trembled around her cup. She didn't say a word, didn't ask for details, didn't finish her sandwich. Outside, the city hummed on. Inside, her heart began to retreat again, just when it had started to open. The headline blinked on her phone like it was shouting, Reeve CEO to wed finance. Heiress Serena Wexley. A match of power and prestige, Marianne gasped as she turned her screen toward Elara. Have you seen this? Callum Reeve, engaged to Serena Wexley, Elridge's ultimate power couple? Elara forced a smile, sipped her coffee, nodded inside. It felt like someone had carved her chest open, she already knew. A few days earlier, he'd accidentally forwarded an internal email about a family event. No explanation, no details, but her heart had filled in the blanks. Long before the media did, she could see it clearly. Callum, in a tailored tux, standing next to a woman who looked like she belonged beside him. Poised, wealthy, breathtaking. A woman of his world, and she was just Elara Moore, an assistant from a small firm, a girl who worked late and drank coffee in chipped mugs. She told herself, of course it was going to end like this. The coffees, the smiles, the book, the umbrella, it had all been a passing kindness, maybe even curiosity, but not something that could survive the weight of his reality. From that moment on, Elara withdrew. She sent colleagues to attend meetings with Reeve in her place, answered his emails with robotic politeness, ignored his jokes. One afternoon, a vanilla latte arrived at her desk with a small note. Are you mad at me? Tell me, my girl. She stared at the message for a long time, then crumpled it, dropped it into the trash without a word. She didn't want to feel anything anymore. Hope was a dangerous weight, and she was already drowning, Callum noticed. Of course he did. The silence from her wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. He texted. No reply. Down straight to voicemail. He even showed up at her office once, only to be told she'd stepped out for the afternoon. She was shutting the door firmly, finally, and it broke something inside him. Because she'd seen the articles, because she thought he'd chosen Serena, but he hadn't. Not really. He'd been cornered by legacy, bound by pressure, drowning in a script he never wrote, and yet, the date arrived anyway. The engagement ceremony was held at the Skylark, a rooftop venue, glittering with gold and glass overlooking the glowing sprawl of Elridge. Everything was immaculate. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears. White orchids imported from Kyoto graced every table. A live string quartet played softly in the background. Politicians, CEOs, foreign dignitaries, all gathered to witness the merging of dynasties. Serena Wexley entered in a gown so brilliant it shimmered like frost. Tall, elegant, confident, her diamond earrings caught the light like stars. She slipped her arm through Callum with effortless grace, and they posed, two perfect statues sculpted for the camera, but behind Callum's composed smile, there was nothing but hollowness. He wore a black tuxedo, every inch the image of power, but his eyes, those eyes searched the crowd as if looking for someone who wouldn't be there. His parents beamed. Frederick nodded with pride. His mother whispered to guests about future mergers and global investments, but all Callum could think of was Elara, her voice, her nervous laughter, the way she bit her lip when overwhelmed. When the ceremony began, his chest tightened with every word. Frederick gave a speech praising unity and tradition. Serena stood beside him, poised, polite, perfect. And then the moment came. The rings, the act that would bind this union in the eyes of business society, legacy. Serena extended her hand with a soft smile, and Callum Reeve, a dazzling diamond ring, sparkled beneath the ballroom's chandeliers nestled in a red velvet box. The room hushed, a collective breath held. Callum stood still, frozen. The box was open in front of him. Serena said the hand was gently outstretched, the cameras poised, the guests watching, but his eyes, they were somewhere else entirely. He saw Elara, curled up in the corner of that ballroom months ago, hugging a glass of wine. The way she flushed at his teasing, the tremble in her voice. When he'd told her he wanted more than one night, he could still hear it, still feel it. And suddenly, the glittering hall around him felt like a cage. If he did this, if he slipped that ring onto Serena's finger, he would lose Elara forever, and that loss was greater than any empire. He drew in a shaky breath, took a step forward, and lifted the microphone. "I am sorry," he said, his voice firm, cutting through the silence like a blade. "I can do this." A gasp rippled across the crowd. "The person I love." He paused, his eyes searching the space between chandeliers, and disbelief isn't here tonight. Serena's posture stiffened. Beside him, his father, Frederick, stepped toward the platform, face blazing with rage. "Callum, what are you doing?" he hissed. His mother, Elowyn, lifted a hand to her mouth. In shock, guests whispered. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning. Serena gripped his arm, her nails biting into his skin. "Have you lost your mind?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Callum turned to her, gently pried her fingers away. "I'm sorry, Serena. You deserve honesty." And this would have been a lie. He faced the crowd once more, his voice steady now. "I don't belong here, not in this life, not in this marriage." He placed the microphone down, turned, and walked away from the stage, from Serena. From the plan, cameras chased him down the aisle. Reporters shouted questions. His father barked his name behind him, but Callum didn't look back. His heart was racing. His only thought was Elara. By the time he reached his car, the headlines had already exploded. Reeve Tech CEO calls off engagement. Mid-ceremony, he walked away from the Empire for love. Serena addressed the press with a diplomatic smile. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, cool and composed. "We'll sort it out privately," but behind the gloss, everyone could see the truth. Callum slammed the door of his car and called his assistant. "I need her full name, her address, everything you've got on Elara." More now, he knew she had pulled away, knew she believed the worst, but he didn't care. He had walked away from everything that was expected of him, and now he just needed to find her, to say the words he should said long ago. He stared out the window as soft rain began to fall, streaking the city in silver. His fingers clenched around the steering wheel. "Elara," he whispered, "I'm coming for you, and this time I won to let you go." Meanwhile, across the city, Elara sat, curled up on the office couch at Halden & Co. The room was quiet, except for the hum of her laptop screen. She hadn't gone home, couldn't he? The day before, she had been scrolling through her inbox when the headline caught her eye. Reeve Tech CEO to be engaged to Serena Wexley. She read it once, twice. The image embedded below the headline showed Callum in a dark suit standing beside a tall, stunning woman in white, Serena Wexley, daughter of one of the wealthiest financial dynasties on the East Coast. Perfect poised, exactly who a man like Callum should be with Elara had read every word of that article with a sinking heart. The hotel, the guest list, the future power couple. It was like watching the final scene of a love story where she'd never even been cast. Every word on the screen cut through Elara like glass. Her chest tightened, her breath caught. She slammed her laptop shut, hands trembling violently, her mind traitorously filled with him. Callum-esque grin, when he decalled her, his one-night girl, with that spark in his voice, the white roses left on her desk, the vanilla latte with the crooked hand-written note, the umbrella in the rain, his body shielding hers from the storm. She had fought so hard to stay professional, to keep her distance, but he had crept into her heart anyway, not with grand promises, but with little unforgettable truths. She had started to believe, to hope, that maybe, just maybe he meant more than the flirtation, that he saw her, that he wanted her, but now it all felt like a cruel joke. She pictured him beside Serena, poised, elegant, glowing in a sea of flashing cameras. A perfect match, a polished life, and she was a passing story, a brief escape before he returned to the world where she didn't belong. "I'm so stupid," she whispered. Tears spilled freely. She wiped them away with trembling fingers, stood and started gathering her things. She couldn't stay here, not in Elridge, not in the city where every corner reminded her of him. She opened her laptop one last time, typed quickly, mechanically. "Dear Ms. Lane, I am resigning for personal reasons, effective immediately. Thank you for the opportunity. Best Elara Moore." She hit send, didn't he? Wait for the regret. She packed lightly, just a backpack, a few clothes, a book, How to Love a Shy Girl, the one he left on her desk. She hesitated, fingers brushing the cover. She wanted to throw it out, but she couldn't. Instead, she tucked it deep into her bag and zipped it shut. By midnight, she was on a train bound for Boston. She stared out the window as the lights of Elridge blurred and faded behind her, her city, her heartbreak. She told herself this was the right choice, that he belonged to another world, that she was walking away before it got worse, but her heart ached as if she'd left it behind on a street corner near Reeve Tech. The train pulled into a quiet suburb lined with maple trees, dressed in gold. She hadn't told anyone she was coming, but when she stepped through the front door of her childhood home, the scent of freshly baked cookies greeted her. Elara, her mother Margaret, peeked from the kitchen, surprise written across her gentle face. "Why didn't you call, honey?" Elara forced a smile, but her red-rimmed eyes betrayed everything. Margaret set down her baking tray and crossed the room in seconds, wrapping her daughter in a hug. Elara. "What's so wrong?" She tried to hold it in. She really did. But her mother's embrace undid her. She broke fully. Finally, between sobs, she told her everything. About that night, about Callum, about the teasing that became tenderness, the soft gestures that became belief, and the article, the woman, the photos, the lie that shattered everything she had let herself feel. Later, she curled up on the couch, hands wrapped around a mug of hot tea. Her tears hadn't stopped. Not yet. "I was so stupid, Mom," she whispered. "I thought I mattered to him. But I was just some game he played." Her mother sat beside her, stroking her hair the way she used to when Elara was small. "You are not stupid," Margaret said softly. "You are in love, and love it always comes with risk." With fear, she paused. "But are you really sure? Or are you letting a headline speak for his heart?" Elara looked down, her voice barely a breath. I haven't asked. I didn't want to know. I don't need to. Mom, Elara whispered. He's the CEO and I am. Just me. She stared down at her tea, its steam rising gently between them. He chose someone who belongs in his world. I don't blame him. I just want to forget. Before Margaret could respond, a soft shuffle of footsteps came from the hallway. Her father, Thomas, stepped into the room. A quiet man, weathered from years of working at a neighborhood garage. He had always been her quiet strength. He sat across from her elbows on his knees, voice low and steady. Elara, he said, I'm not rich. I have never been powerful, but I've loved your mother for 30 years because she is the only one who's ever made me want to be a better man. He met her eyes. If that guy truly cares for you, he won to let you go easy. But if you run just because you're afraid, you may never know what was real. Elara. Chin trembled, her eyes welled again. But what if I'm wrong, Dad? She whispered. What if I hope and get hurt all over again? Thomas reached across the table, took her hand gently in his. Then you will stand up again, because you are stronger than you think, sweetheart, and if it's love you, owe it to yourself to face it. Dawn to let fear decide your future. That night's sleep didn't come. She lay in her childhood room, the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, still faintly shining, like they had when she was a child, but peace didn't find her. She held the book in her arms, How to Love a Shy Girl. She flipped to a page he'd underlined. One smile from her can light up the whole world. Tears spilled again. Did he really see her that way? Did he ever? Days in Boston passed slowly. She helped her mother in the garden, took walks with her father on the wooded trail behind their street. She tried to find peace in routine, but every quiet moment became a space Callum could slip into. She wondered what he was doing, if he'd gone through with the engagement, if he ever thought of her at all. She scrolled the news, sometimes, but never dared click the articles. Not after the first one, her heart couldn't take another break. She started writing in a journal, pouring her emotions onto the page, because speaking them aloud still hurt too much. You said you wanted more than one night. She wrote, her pen trembling. But maybe you didn't know I wanted that too. I just wasn't brave enough to say it. Meanwhile, across the city, Elara had left behind Callum. Reeve had just walked out of the most defining moment of his life. Rain soaked through his tuxedo as he stormed out of the plaza ballroom, cameras flashing in his wake. Guests gasping chaos trailing him. But none of it mattered. Only one thing did Elara. He had let her walk away once. He wasn't going to make the same mistake again. In the back of his car, his voice was sharp, breathless. Clara, find her, he told his assistant, Elara Moore. I need her address, a phone number, anything, now. Clara, ever efficient, hesitated for the first time. Sir, the press is in a frenzy. The story is everywhere. Are you sure I've never been more sure? Callum said. Do it. But Elara had vanished. Clara searched everywhere. Company records, digital trails, even private contacts from Brightwave S. Project partners? Nothing she'd quit. Left no forwarding information, no trace. It was like chasing a shadow. Callum was relentless. He drove through the city alone, retracing memories, the cafe where she always ordered vanilla lattes, the tiny park where she once told him about her favorite childhood book, the bench where she'd once blushed when he complimented her smile. He even went back to Reeve Tech, hoping she might just appear again, but all he found was silence and a hollow ache where her laughter used to echo. He called again and again, dozens of times, but the number was disconnected. He texted. He emailed, every message dissolved into silence. For a man who had built his life on control, on outcomes, on certainties, this helplessness was foreign and suffocating. The next morning, Clara finally called. I found something, she said. There is an address, suburbs of Boston, registered Under the Moore family. Before she could finish, Callum was already packing. He caught the earliest flight, no luggage, just his phone and the note Elara had once left behind just one night. Thank you for making me feel seen. He kept it in his jacket pocket. Like it was the last thread tying him to her, Boston welcomed him with a soft drizzle, a quiet kind of rain, not enough to soak, but just enough to seep into his bones. He stood outside a modest brick house, white trim around the windows, daisies blooming in the front garden. It was the kind of home that whispered of warmth, of memories, made in quiet corners, nothing like the steel and glass of Elridge. Autumn drew a shaky breath. He didn't know if she was here, didn't know if she would even speak to him, but he had to try. Even if it shattered him, he stepped onto the porch, hair-damp shirt clinging to his back. Each knock on the door felt like a prayer. The door opened slowly. An older woman, graceful, kind-eyed but cautious, stood in the doorway. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice soft but wary. "My name is Callum Reeve," he said, his voice rough from no sleep. I need to see Elara. Please, I know she might not want to, but I need to talk to her, the woman." Margaret studied him for a long silent beat. She saw it in his eyes, the ache, the desperation, the truth. Without a word, she turned and called out into the house. "Elara, someone is here. For you." Elara was on the back porch, a blanket around her shoulders, a cup of tea cooling beside her, and the book, How to Love a Shy Girl, open in her lap. When she heard her mother's voice, she assumed it was a neighbor, an old friend maybe? She stepped inside casually and stopped. Frozen, her hand gripped the doorframe as her knees nearly buckled. "Callum," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. He stood there, soaked from the rain, eyes, red hair, plastered to his forehead. He looked like a man who'd have crossed oceans for a single chance. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. He took a step forward, dripping water onto the hardwood, but not caring. "I don't care what you think of me," he said, voice raw. "I just know one thing. I need you, Elara." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. She stepped outside, onto the porch, needing air. The rain continued, soft and steady. He followed her out, not hesitating. She turned to him, voice catching in her throat. "You flirted with me, made me believe in something, and then you chose someone else. You let me believe I was just a moment to pass the time." Callum's breath caught. "No," he said quickly. "No. Elara, please. You don't understand." She stepped back. "But I do. Callum, I saw the articles. I saw her. Serena." He reached for her hand. She tried to pull away, but he didn't let go. "Elara, listen to me," he said, gripping her hand tighter. His voice a blend of urgency and tenderness. "I never chose anyone else. I canceled the engagement because of you." She stared at him, disbelief etched across her face. "You canceled it?" she echoed, voice barely audible. He nodded. "Serena was my family's choice, not mine." I agreed, because I felt trapped, because I didn't know how to fight for what I really wanted. He stepped closer, but that day, when I was supposed to put a ring on her finger, all I could think about was you, your smile, your voice, your note. "Elara." This lip trembled. "The moment I stood on that stage," he continued, "I saw your face, and I realized if I went through with it, I'd lose the only person who ever made me feel like I could be more than just the job, more than the suit, more than the name." Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I tried to tell you. I sent emails. I came to your office. You were gone." She closed her eyes. "I was scared I was too," he said, "but I'm not anymore." "You were curled up at that gala," Callum said, voice barely above the rhythm of the rain, "blushing when I teased you, trembling when I told you I wanted more than just one night." He stepped closer, eyes never leaving hers, and in that moment, standing on that stage, I realized if I went forward with that engagement, I'd lose you. Forever. His voice broke slightly. So I stopped, and I told the world the person I love wasn't there. Elara stood frozen, heart caught between disbelief and longing. Why, she whispered. Why me, Callum? You could have anyone, Serena. Any woman who fits your world. Just me, Callum. Smile was tender, touched with sadness. He reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. Yuri, not just you. Elara, you were the woman who made me want to slow down, the one who made me want to be better. You made me believe love isn't just a passing spark. It's a fire worth staying near. He exhaled, his voice rough but certain. I don't care how ordinary you think you are. To me, you are everything. Elara let the tears fall freely, no longer holding back. Then without another word, she stepped forward and fell into his arms. He held her tight, his clothes soaked through, but warm against her, safe, steady. You promised me. Just one night, she murmured against his chest. Callum kissed her hair gently. I was wrong, he whispered. One night was never enough. I want forever. Elara, behind the front window. Margaret watched silently, a quiet smile touching her lips. She turned back toward the kitchen. Thomas, still in his armchair, glanced up from the paper. Well, he asked softly. Margaret smiled wider. Better than we ever hoped. Out on the porch, Elara looked up into Callum's eyes. There was still fear inside her, still the trembling question, what if it's too big, too real? But his gaze, full of love, not promises, made her believe again. I can promise I won to be scared, she said, voice shaking. I am not good at this. At trusting, Callum took her hand, intertwining their fingers. I am scared too, he said quietly, but I'm more afraid of losing you. So let's be scared together. Let's learn how to get this right, one day at a time. She nodded, through tears, through rain, and then she smiled, her first real smile since she left Elridge. It lit him up inside, like sunrise after storm. He leaned in and kissed her softly, deeply, with every word he'd never quite found. The rain kept falling, but to them, it was no longer cold. He had found her again. And this time, he wouldn't let her go. The maple trees blazed gold. The air smelled of dry leaves and fresh beginnings. In a small park near the Moore family home, where winding paths circled a glassy lake, Callum Reeve stood beneath a wooden arch laced with white daisies and green vines. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up, no tie, no flash, just truth. His grin was mischievous, as always, but today it was softened by something deeper, love, peace, home. Elara approached arm in arm with her father. She wore a flowing white dress that kissed her ankles, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders, crowned with a halo of daisies. No heavy makeup, no jewels, but her eyes sparkled, and in Callum's eyes, she was the most beautiful thing the world had ever seen. Only a handful of people stood waiting, her mother eyes glistening. Callum's best friend, Ethan, winking from the front row, a few loved ones, no press, no spotlight, just them. This wasn't a business merger. Wasn't a high society gala. This was their moment, a quiet promise made not in grandeur, but in rain and brokenness and second chances. Callum reached for her hand as she stood before him. Still scared, he whispered. Elara smiled, her voice steady now. Yes, but this time I'm not running. No flashing cameras, no press, no expectations, just love, quiet, true, and wholly theirs. Callum had proposed to Elara 3 months ago, right in that same park, where leaves whispered with the wind, and everything had started to heal. It had been a drizzly afternoon. Soft rain fell, like a blessing. He knelt beneath an old maple tree, holding a simple silver ring, a small sapphire gleaming at its center. Elara, he said, his voice trembling. I thought one night would be enough. I was wrong. I want forever with you. Will you marry me? She couldn't even speak. Tears had spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, heart bursting. Once love had terrified her, but his unwavering sincerity had helped her unlearn the fear one day. One smile, one act of kindness at a time. Now, under the soft golden glow of autumn, they stood hand in hand, ready. An old friend of the Moore family, standing as their officiant, smiled warmly. Today we gather to witness the love of Callum and Elara. She began a love that started not with a grand plan, but a single, unexpected moment and grew into something extraordinary. Callum never took his eyes off Elara, not once. When it came time to exchange vows, he squeezed her hands gently. His voice, rich and steady, carried through the stillness. Elara, he began, I used to think love was fleeting, a spark that fades a game, to pass the time. But then you came into my life with your quiet courage, your sad eyes and shy smile, and suddenly I wanted to be a better man, he smiled, glancing at their guests. I promise to love you, protect you, and make you laugh, even if I'm still the cheeky guy who hides notes in your books. Laughter rippled through the crowd, rippled. Elara smiled, her eyes shimmering. Then it was her turn. She inhaled deeply. Callum, she said, her voice soft but certain. There was a time I thought I wasn't made for love, that someone like me, quiet, ordinary, couldn't belong in a story like this. She paused, glancing at their entwined fingers. But you never asked me to be anything more than myself. You made me feel seen, and now I promise to stay, to try even when I'm scared, to run toward you, not away. She winked through her tears. Callum laughed. Eyes glistening, they exchanged rings, simple silver bands, engraved with each other, names. Inside, as he slid hers onto her finger, he leaned in and whispered, playful yet sincere, then smiled. I thought one night would be enough, but for you, I'd trade 1,000 lifetimes. She blushed, swatted his arm, and the crowd erupted into applause. Their kiss was quiet, slow, and reverent. It didn't need fireworks. It was the kind of kiss that said, we made it. The reception unfolded right there in the park. Wooden tables draped in white linen, homemade cookies from Margaret's oven, a small local band strumming joyful tunes under the fading sun. Children danced in the grass, laughter floated like music, no spectacle, just warmth, just love. They moved into a small Boston apartment not far from the park. Elara found work at a local publishing house, still shy, still soft-spoken, but no longer afraid to let love stay. Callum remained CEO of Reeve Tech, but he changed. He still teased, still left silly notes on the fridge. But now he was a husband who walked her home, under the stars, who kept her favorite tea, stalked, who kissed her forehead every night, as if to say, you matter. There were challenges. The press resurfaced the story sometimes, the CEO who left the heiress for a mystery woman. Callum faced his father. As disappointment, Elara, her own self-doubts. But every time she faltered, Callum was there, holding her hand, whispering, you my home, Elara. Nothing changes that. One evening, as they curled together on the couch, Elara reading a novel, while Callum rested his head in her lap, he looked up, that old roguish grin tugging at his lips. My girl, he said, voice playful. Do you know when I first fell for you? Elara blushed, nudging his shoulder. No, when... Stop being so cheeky, Elara murmured, brushing a strand of hair from his face. But Callum only smiled, his voice softer than the breeze around them. It was the way you bit your lip that night, at that networking gala, like I was the biggest idiot alive. He chuckled. I knew right then you were the one I'd be chasing for the rest of my life. Elara laughed, leaned down and kissed him gently, and I, she whispered, fell for you when you stood there in the rain soaked through like a lost puppy just to say you needed me. What was meant to be one fleeting night became the beginning of everything. From a moment in a city that once felt too big, they found their way to something lasting. Together they weathered silence, misunderstandings, the weight of expectations, and most of all, their own fears. Callum once, a CEO who ran from emotion, learned what it meant to truly love. And Elara once, a quiet girl who doubted she could ever be enough, learned that she had always been worthy of joy. Under the Boston night sky where the air smelled of autumn and beginnings, they walked side by side along the same winding path where they'd once promised each other forever. Moonlight spilled across the leaves at their feet. The stars blinked quietly above Callum, gave her hand a gentle squeeze. My girl, he whispered, ready for forever. Elara smiled, her heart peaceful. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. Ready, she said softly. But you are going to tone down the cheekiness. Right, he laughed, kissing her forehead. No promises, and so they kept walking, step by step, hand in hand, and they didn't know what tomorrow would bring. No one ever does. But they knew this. They had each other, and sometimes that's all the forever you need. Because love doesn't have to be loud to be real, it just has to be true. Dear beloved, listeners, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for walking with us through this story. One that began with uncertainty and ended with healing, love, and quiet hope. Your presence, your time, and your open hearts mean more than words can express. At Shining Stories, we believe that stories have the power to mend the broken, to remind us we're not alone, and to light a gentle path forward. No matter how dark things may seem, if this story touched something in you, even just for a moment, then it was worth telling. Thank you for letting us be a small part of your day, your thoughts, and maybe even your heart. With all our warmth, the Shining Stories team.